All right, welcome class. This is Christian Martinson. I've got Dr. James Spencer here on the phone again, and we're looking at your discussion board question for this week. Let me just read it to you, and then we can go from there. In his 1977 article in the Tyndale Bulletin, Henri BVlocher, who is French, I understand, poses the following questions. Was it Israelite wisdom only practical? Was it restricted to counsels for life management, laws of success, and rules of behavior? Or did a theoretical or theological element interfere? How would you answer this question? Was wisdom strictly practical, or did it have a theoretical, theological basis? Why do you think so? James, how would you address this question here in relation to Henri BVlocher's questions here?
Yeah, I think first I'd just like to say I actually studied under Henri BVlocher at Wheaton College when I was there. He was a fantastic guy.
Henri, picking names.
Yeah, big deal. The first time I met him, I think I actually pronounced his name Blocker, and he quickly corrected me. So,
I bet he did.
Those French names are a little tough to get their head around. But yeah, it's Henri BVlocher is his name. But he's a fascinating scholar, really embodies a good bit of wisdom, and so I think it's appropriate for us to be talking about this with his words in our mind. Essentially, I think that, Proverbs in the ancient Near East were used in several different ways, but there's a certain vibe about Proverbs that you have to understand, and I'll read a quote from actually Proverbs 26:7. Which says, like a lame man's legs that hang limp is a proverb in the mouth of a fool. And that sort of communicates essentially that Proverbs were not designed to just be thrown out there at any time, any place. If you don't understand how to use them, they're not going to be useful to you.
Yeah.
But what I think it highlights is the practicality of the proverb. It implies that there is a context for their use, and this was actually used in other ancient Near Eastern societies also had proverbs, and so in the instruction of I'm going to have trouble pronouncing this, but it's actually called the instruction of Ankylospony. There's a warning in one of their proverbs that says, "Fools cannot tell teaching from insult." And, it's saying essentially the same thing.
Yeah.
That, to some extent, to use Proverbs, you have to have a degree of wisdom. And I think that's important for us to remember. There is this very practical side to the Proverbs. Now, that said, even though there's a practical side to the Proverbs, I think they do intersect with theology a great deal. So in the book of Proverbs, we hear that the fear of the Lord is really the beginning of wisdom. And you just can't get around the theological aspect of that statement.
Yeah.
It's not really possible.
Yeah.
As I think through this issue, I think that the two have to happily coexist together. You have to have a strong theological grounding and a real strong theological worldview to understand how the Proverbs even become practical.
Yeah.
How you find usefulness out of the Proverbs, how you find hope in the Proverbs, how the Proverbs really be read and understood in the context of covenant and God and creation. And so I think that it would be difficult for me to say that the biblical Proverbs express these sort of universal principles, right? I don't know that secular people who don't have fear of the Lord could really utilize Proverbs effectively. And maybe that's a little strange to say, but ultimately, if the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and we really need to know God in order to use the Proverbs as we have them in the Old Testament effectively.
Sure. Now that sounds great in theory, and I think most would Christian believers would agree with that concept, and it seems to connect and make some sense. But how would you practically play that out into perhaps giving an example of maybe a proverbial piece of wisdom that seems very practical, that any secular person could find some agreement and value in, and how our understanding of whether the fear of the Lord or having that theological basis is going to transcend how we utilize that principle?
Yeah, that's a good question. One of the proverbs that comes to mind is, I have three kids. I have a 6-year-old son and two daughters, twins. And one of the proverbs that comes to mind is Proverbs of Solomon. It's actually Proverbs 10:1. It says, "A wise child makes a father rejoice, but a foolish child is a grief to his mother." Obviously, if we apply that proverb in the context of our families, what we see is, obviously when my son or daughters are wise in their decisions, I'm a happy camper. When they're foolish in their decisions, nobody's really happy. While that may appear then to be something that a secular family would also say, I don't think that I could talk to any dad who wouldn't be happy that his son is making good choices.
Right.
It's actually the essence of the wisdom that is the difference.
Yeah.
And so when I read it, a wise child, what does that mean? What does it mean for him to be a wise child? As opposed to him just making, good decisions that are moral and societally authorized. My picture of my wise child comes out in sort of a story. My son was involved in church, just going to Sunday school. And
can you repeat that first part again? We lost you on that first part.
Yeah, I apologize.
No, that's okay.
I'll illustrate this in a story and kind of talk through, wisdom here. My son was involved in church. They were telling him that he needed to share his faith with people and tell other people about the Bible. And so we just got out of church and we drove to Subway to get lunch because I'm lazy and I didn't feel like cooking. And he's sitting over there talking to these two little girls in a booth about Jesus and that they need to read their Bibles and I hear him talk to them and I hear them laugh, I hear them kind of chuckle at him and those kind of things, and that was when as a father I rejoice.
Yeah.
I get a certain pride out of my son being good, and I like to hear that his teachers think that he's a well-mannered young man. But it doesn't really make me rejoice in the same way as when I see my son really enacting himself as a Christian.
Sure.
Really embodying Jesus' love to other people.
Sure.
In a way that moves beyond manners and really gives him some sort of really particularly Christian thing that he's doing.
Yeah.
And sharing his faith with those girls at Subway, I always just think back at that. When I read this proverb, I say that's being a wise child. Yeah. This is when I see the difference, really, just between well-mannered and societally acceptable and actually theological, Christian son making his father rejoice.
Yeah,
and so that I think it's in the way that you nuance what that wise child is. I think we need to be careful not to let wisdom be co-opted by the secular, and really retain its Christian understanding that is rooted in that fear of the Lord.
Beautiful. Yeah, and I think that's a perfect way to frame that, and that gives a really practical sense of how we can actualize those concepts. So, Dr. Spencer, thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you on the next video. Thanks.